Congresswoman Jill Tokuda challenged Secretary Pete Hegseth on two core issues: the risk of corporate influence within the Pentagon and the potential use of military force against American citizens. The hearing began with Congresswoman Tokuda focusing on the relationship between the Department of Defense, DoD, and private industry. She immediately questioned Secretary Hegseth regarding tech mogul Elon Musk. Tokuda asked directly if Hegseth had invited Musk to the Pentagon for a briefing on war plans with China. Hegseth responded that there had been a lot of hyperbole and incorrect reporting around the situation. He confirmed Musk was invited to come talk to us generally, but denied that war plans were discussed. Tokuda sought clarification on whose idea it was to invite the CEO. Hegseth explained that at that time, Elon Musk was leading up Doge efforts, and the DoD had a great investment in Doge. Hegseth stated that getting Musk's input on how to make the DoD more efficient made a great deal of sense. Tokuda immediately challenged this justification, characterizing it as a conflict of interest. She noted that Musk is the world's richest man. Furthermore, his company is engaged in billions of dollars of contracts with the DoD. Tokuda argued that by leading Doge, Musk was intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. She asked if inviting someone with such financial interest into the Pentagon to gain first-hand knowledge was a conflict. Hegseth characterized the event as just an informal discussion. He insisted the Defense Department shows no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are. Tokuda quantified the financial connection. She referenced a $280 million donation and concluded that the world's richest man, whose companies are intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense, gained access into the Pentagon. She summarized this situation as the textbook definition of institutional capture. The Congresswoman then sharply shifted the focus away from corporate contracts toward a matter of constitutional order. She raised the events of January 6, 2021. Tokuda reminded the Secretary that during the attack on the Capitol, rioters attacked federal law enforcement officials, destroyed federal property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages. She posed the question, would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day? She noted that 140 Capitol police officers were injured and one died the next day. Hegseth responded by citing that President Trump had requested the National Guard in advance, but it took him quite a long time for deployment. Tokuda insisted on receiving his personal answer as Secretary of Defense. Hegseth continued to focus on the historical timeline of the Trump administration's deployment decision. Tokuda concluded that Hegseth's response implied he would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Tokuda then introduced the most urgent and chilling question of the entire exchange. She reminded Hegseth that during his confirmation hearing, he allegedly failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. She asked him directly whether he would carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights. Hegseth initially suggested Tokuda was insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, but Tokuda clarified she was referring to protests throughout the country. Hegseth declined a simple yes or no answer. Instead, he referenced standard rules of engagement that are in place, that guide troops, and which they abide by. Tokuda pressed him on his allegiance, stating that he serves at the pleasure of the president. She repeated the hypothetical. So if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Hegseth refused the question, stating he would refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner. He contended that the issue was not hypothetical, noting the current presence of more Marines and National Guard in Los Angeles than in Syria and Iran combined. With her time expiring, Tokuda delivered a final assessment of his refusal to answer. I think it's interesting that for 4 years insurrection was the left. I think we know your answer. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The core function of this exchange was not simply to investigate a high-ranking official. It was a calculated test of the fundamental guardrails protecting American democracy. The source materials make clear that Tokuda's line of questioning sought to determine if the Secretary prioritized the Constitution over blind allegiance to executive power. In America, There is a foundational principle. The military does not police the public. This principle is formalized in laws like the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. These laws exist to prevent a president from using armed troops to enforce domestic laws or control civilian protests. That separation is a vital element protecting the nation from sliding into authoritarianism. When Congresswoman Tokuda asked if Hegseth would carry out an order to fire upon citizens exercising their First Amendment rights, the only acceptable answer, according to constitutional principles, is an unambiguous no. That would be an unlawful order. Hegseth's evasion, his refusal to cross that line with a firm rejection, is seen in the sources as both dangerous and potentially disqualifying. If military leaders are willing to even consider firing on Americans simply because a president gave the order, the discussion moves beyond law enforcement and toward authoritarianism in plain sight. This refusal to provide a clear answer does not enforce boundaries. Rather, it cracks open the door to abuse. The precedent is frightening. If one president can issue an illegal order to use military force against political dissent, any future president could attempt the same. Political protests, civil rights gatherings, or union strikes could potentially be met with military action instead of debate. History offers a stark warning. The sources remind us of the Kent State shootings in 1970. In that instance, the National Guard opened fire on student protesters, killing 4. That event remains a harrowing caution of how quickly a domestic situation can spiral when troops are deployed against civilian dissent. The fact that Congress must ask if a defense official would follow an illegal order to shoot citizens suggests a serious erosion of principles. When military officials refuse to state outright that they would never obey such an unlawful order, it indicates that the constitutional guardrails have become fragile. Tokuda's final statement, "I think we know your answer," was the summation of this crisis. It highlighted a system where constitutional accountability appeared to take a back seat, replaced by ambiguity. For democracy to function, clear answers must reinforce boundaries, and vague answers must not be accepted when the stakes involve the use of force against the American public. The question remains, in moments of extreme political tension, is the military's highest loyalty to the commander-in-chief or to the Constitution that protects the right of every American to protest? That is the essential test of character Tokuda administered, and the ambiguity of the response leaves us to wonder just how strong those democratic guardrails truly are.